The thought of not having enough money for your retirement can be a very scary idea. Worrying about money is something that a lot of people will struggle with, so as a solution, in 2007 the New Zealand government introduced KiwiSaver. This compulsory savings plan was designed to help people make sure they were going to have a smooth retirement and also help them get into their first home. Virtually everyone in New Zealand contributes to this scheme, but there's a lot of key things that you need to be aware of to make sure that you're maximizing your returns from KiwiSaver. Like, what is the optimal amount to contribute? Should you stick with the bare minimum of 3%, or should you max it out all the way up to 10%? And who is going to be the best provider? Should you just stick with your bank, or should you seek an independent provider to manage your money for you? And what's going to be the best fund that's ultimately going to make you the most money? Should you be nice and safe and stick with a cash fund, or should you take more risk but also a greater potential for reward with a growth fund? Throughout this video, I'll be giving you some practical examples to make sure you're getting the most out of your KiwiSaver and show you some potential limitations that you may not be aware of, like how it can actually be near impossible to secure a first home grant and how minimal the actual returns can be from KiwiSaver depending on which fund you choose. This video is based on my personal opinion about KiwiSaver. Always make sure to do your own research and speak to a licensed professional, and take everything I say in this video with a very large bucket of salt. What actually is KiwiSaver? Essentially, it's a compulsory savings plan introduced by the government to help Kiwis get into their first home and actually plan for their retirement. Essentially, a percentage of your weekly paycheck with a minimum of 3% and a maximum of 10% is deducted and placed into a type of savings account. This money can only be accessed under certain circumstances, like buying your first home, extreme financial hardship, or reaching the age of retirement. You can also make voluntary contributions towards your KiwiSaver if you want to top it up a bit more than the predetermined percentages that you currently have. So firstly, you need to figure out who is going to be the best provider, and you have two main options when it comes to this. Firstly, you can go with the bank that you're currently using, and this may include ASB, Westpac, or ANZ, or you can seek an independent provider, and the one that I personally recommend is Simplicity. The three main criteria that you're looking at with a provider is the fund's past performance, the types of companies you can invest in using the provider, and finally the types of funds that you have available. Firstly, you have a cash fund, and this is designed to be very stable in the short term but gives you overall quite poor long-term growth. It puts your money into cash-based assets like bonds and money market securities. Overall, I really wouldn't recommend this fund type because a KiwiSaver scheme is designed to give you long-term growth on your investment. You'll start contributing to KiwiSaver somewhere in your late teens or early 20s, so you've got 40 or 50 years even before you need to be able to access that money. You're not really looking for short-term stability because it's a very long-term game, 40 years plus, by the time you actually need to use any of the money that you've saved for your retirement. So I wouldn't recommend a cash fund, and it's overall going to give you the worst return out of any KiwiSaver fund that you can pick. Next, you have a balanced fund which has 40% of its money in cash-based assets similar to the cash fund we discussed earlier, and then the other 60% will be in growth-based investments like shares of individual companies. Over a 10-year period, this fund doesn't give you the same return as a growth-based fund, however it's deemed to be more stable and doesn't have as much volatility as the growth fund might have. Overall, this is quite a safe KiwiSaver fund, but it's definitely not going to be the best one for you in the long run. Finally, we have a growth-based fund which has 80% of its money in growth-based assets like the shares of individual companies and only 20% in cash-based assets. This is most definitely going to be the best KiwiSaver fund for you. It has the most volatility in it in the short term, but in the long term it makes you the most money. And the important thing to keep in mind with KiwiSaver is that it's not a savings plan. You're essentially giving your money to another company to invest on your behalf, and the keyword is investment, not savings. Because it's invested in companies, it goes up and down and it's not stable. Therefore, you want it in a growth fund, because when you're saving your retirement, this happens across multiple decades. So if you start contributing to KiwiSaver when you're 20 and you retire at the age of 65, 65, and over that period of time, the short-term price fluctuations, which are just completely normal when it comes to investing, don't matter at all. You want to maximize the growth of your fund because that's going to give you the most money. Because you don't have to take your money out for multiple decades and you can leave it invested with KiwiSaver, it's important to pick a growth-based fund and look at it as a long-term investment, because you're not trying to make money in the short term, and you can't even access your money until you're 65 anyway, so it doesn't matter if there's some variability in the price movements. So to illustrate why a growth fund is definitely the best option no matter which provider you're currently using, I'll just throw up the average returns between ASB, ANZ and Simplicity. So firstly, jumping into ASB, you can see that with the cash fund is definitely going to give you the lowest yield at 2.74%. And then jumping over to ANZ, it's also a similar story. And then jumping over to the growth fund, it's about 6.6%. So overall, you can see that Simplicity has the best return. However, its fund information only goes back to 2016. So you can really see the more risk you take, the more money you will make. And with the growth fund, this is definitely the way to go. One of the main reasons I say Simplicity is better is due to the fees that it charges. It'll only charge you 0.31% of whatever you invest, and that means if you invest $1,000, you'll only pay $3.10 in fees. So on screen, I'll show you how the different fees compare for ASB, ANZ and Simplicity between the different funds that they offer, and these fees are based on an investment of $10,000. So you can see for ASB, Simplicity beats it out amongst all different types of funds. Even a Simplicity growth fund, which has the best returns, is cheaper than investing in an ASB cash fund, and the price for a Simplicity growth fund is just under half of that of an ASB growth fund. And then with ANZ, the only fund that's cheaper than the Simplicity growth fund is the ANZ cash fund. Simplicity also gives you a detailed breakdown of where your money is going. You can see the top 10 holdings for different funds, and looking at a growth fund, you can see that some of the main companies it invests in include Apple, Fisher & Paykel and Microsoft. It's important to keep in mind that the types of companies that a KiwiSaver scheme will put their money into do have to be safe for their investors. While you might hear that a growth fund is more volatile, if you look at the main companies a provider puts their money into, they are very stable businesses. I mean, Apple and Microsoft are amongst the largest companies in the world, and their valuation is in the trillions. It'll take hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to drive the price of these companies up or down. They don't have massive drops in their value, and they are overall a very safe and consistent investment. Because do keep in mind that while a KiwiSaver scheme is trying to make you the most money and have the best performance and beat out other providers, they do need to have secure investments. They can't be putting all of their money into companies like Tesla, which can have massive price fluctuations in the short term. It'll scare off all of their investors and no one would leave their money with them. I mean, would you put your money with a KiwiSaver provider that has up to a 40 or 50% drop in the value of your life savings that you're going to need for your retirement? Most people wouldn't. So they do pick very safe companies. While an individual business like Apple may not be as safe as bonds or other cash-based assets, it's still a very, very stable company that's a juggernaut when it comes to the stock market. So do keep in mind that it is technically more volatile to use a growth fund, but the companies that make up the growth fund are very stable overall. Next, jumping into how to take advantage of government grants. Firstly, we'll be looking at how to get some first home grants, either to purchase an existing property or build your own. And remember, at the start of the video, I said how difficult these can actually be to get. So firstly, there's a threshold for how much money you make before you're actually eligible to get one of these grants. If you're an individual person buying a home, you have to make under $95,000. If you have one child, then you have to be making $150,000 or less. And if it's two people buying a home with one or more children, your combined income can't exceed $150,000. So with an existing home, you'll get up to $5,000, and for a new build, you'll get up to $10,000. So I'll just throw up on screen how much a house can be valued for an existing property or a new build to be able to receive a grant, and then what the average house price is in that area. So as you can see on screen, for a first home in the Northland region, a house has to be $400,000 or less, or for a new build, it can be $675,000. And then the average for the far north is $760,000. So you're a bit limited when it comes to this option. And then if you go down to Auckland, where an existing property can be $875K, or it's the same price for a new build, but the average price in Auckland is $1.2 million. And I mean, good luck finding a house in Auckland that's under $900,000 that's actually livable. Look at this abomination that's sold for $1.2 million, and it looks like it's falling apart. And it's always easy to pick on Auckland. It's got the highest average house price in the country. So what about other parts of the country like the South Island? So in Dunedin, it's $500K for an existing property and $675 for a new build, and the average again exceeds this at $695,000. So you're pretty limited if you actually want to take advantage of this first home grant, unless you're living in a very isolated place like Kaikoui in the far north, where the average house price is $335,000 and the threshold is $400K to get a first home grant. So then you're in luck and you can actually take advantage of it. But unless you're living in a very rural part and you don't want to move away out of one of the main centers, then you're not going to have much luck getting this grant. And then that really makes you ask the question, will it be worth using KiwiSaver, since one of the main reasons to have a KiwiSaver is to help you get into your first home. But with the average house price constantly going up, is it actually going to help you achieve that goal? And then you can also take advantage of some additional top-ups through a government scheme. So for every $1 that you invest, the government will give you 50 cents up to $521, and you just have to invest a minimum of $1,042 per year to take advantage of these government top-ups. Next, we'll be looking at what is the best amount to contribute towards your KiwiSaver. So this will depend on a few things. Firstly, you can definitely just go with a maximum of 10%. And I think this is ideal for people that aren't interested in learning about money and don't want to learn how to actually invest their own money and would prefer to leave it up to someone else. It's definitely good for people that have quite poor spending habits. They're always buying things, they have very limited savings, and it's great because this 10% will make sure that you're having some compulsory savings and you're not going to lose out during your retirement, and you actually have some money to support yourself. But the one that I would personally recommend is 3%, and this means that your employer will match the 3% that you put in. So essentially you're making 100% on the 3% that you contribute, and this is the best for people who are actually good with their savings and are interested in learning to invest their own money. Of course, people that are in different professions like those in the military or the police can get a greater contribution matched. Even up to 8% can be matched from your employer. So if you're in that boat, it could be worthwhile bumping up your contribution amount. So what's going to be the benefit in learning to invest your own money? Shouldn't you really leave that up to someone that knows what they're doing? Isn't it going to be complicated or take up lots of your time? Well, really, investing your money is the best option for your retirement, and it's so straightforward and simple, you probably won't take me seriously when I tell you how much money you could make from it in comparison to leaving it with a KiwiSaver provider. So the investment that I'm talking about, and I'm sure you're familiar with if you've been following the channel, is the S&P 500. For people that don't know what this is, essentially it's a cluster of the 500 biggest publicly traded companies in America. Think brands like Google, Facebook, and Coca-Cola. They're all put together into one investment, so when you buy into this, you're essentially getting a small piece of the overall stock market. It's provided an average return of 10% since the 1950s and is considered to be one of the safest, most consistent, and profitable ways to invest your money into the stock market itself. So we'll compare the average return of investing your money into the S&P 500 or into the ANZ or ASB growth KiwiSaver schemes and see the differences in the total return that you'll make. So these figures are going to be based on a few assumptions. First of all, that you start contributing to KiwiSaver at the age of 20, you retire at the age of 65, so that's 45 years and on a $52,000 a year salary. And I know that might be a lot for someone that's in their 20s, but this salary is based on $52,000 for the whole 45 years. That also means that you're going to be getting no raises and no actual increased value on how much you're getting paid per hour or how much you're making on your salary, which normally wouldn't happen. If you're in a job, you would consistently get more money, but just for the sake of this example, we'll stick with a salary of $52,000 for the whole 45 45-year period, and a contribution of 3% of your paycheck plus an extra $1,000 a month top up. So this means for 45 years you're contributing 3% of your income. That 3% is matched by your provider, and you're putting in an extra $1,000 a month into your KiwiSaver. So as you can see on screen, ASB will give you just over $1.3 million, ANZ is just under $1.6 million, and with the S&P 500 putting in $1,000 a month for 45 years at an average return of 10%, as we discussed earlier, it will give you $8.6 million. So you can see virtually a $7 million difference between putting your money in the S&P 500 in comparison to the most high growth KiwiSaver schemes that you can invest in. And ASB and ANZ are the most popular banks within New Zealand, so these statistics more likely than not will apply to you. And this is in comparison to the best KiwiSaver schemes, which are a growth fund. If you have a cash fund or conservative fund, these differences will be far greater and you'll be losing out on a lot more than $7 million. And this illustrates the point, is KiwiSaver really worth it if you can barely get a home grant with it, and if there's a far better way to invest your money that'll make you upwards of $7 million extra in comparison to leaving it with a KiwiSaver provider. And if you want to have $1 million for your retirement, all you need to do with the S&P 500, if you put in $100 a week for 33 years at an average return of 10%, you'll get $1 million as well. That means you could start saving for your retirement at the age of 32 and still have virtually the same amount as the return from a KiwiSaver provider. All you need to do to make this happen is just make sure you can save $100 a week, set up an automatic payment from your bank account into a brokerage platform, either Hatch or Sharesies, and then set up an automatic payment from one of these brokerage platforms into the S&P 500. It's very straightforward and can be done by anyone. And if you're interested in learning a more step-by-step breakdown of how to get your retirement sorted, potentially without KiwiSaver, and also look at some other cons of this retirement plan that might make you question if it's really worth it, then make sure to check out this video on screen to see how to get ready for retirement without actually using a KiwiSaver scheme.